Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today is the day, and we are here, and we're happy to be here. For those who do not know me, you know my name is, what is my name? You don't know me, but my name is Sabrina Walker Hernandez, and welcome to Sipping Tea with Sabrina. So, in just a second, we'll be sharing the tea on how to make difficult decisions. But if you've never met me before, as I started off with, I am Sabrina. I am the founder of Supporting World's Hope LLC, which is a coaching and consulting company I started after 25 years in the nonprofit industry. I train CEOs, boards of directors, and employees across diverse sectors, but my heart is with associations, mission-driven companies, and nonprofits. And I train them in leadership skills, focusing on revenue, relationships, and retention. And so if you see me looking down, it's because here it goes. I'm just going to tell you that there are some tech steps that have to happen, right, as we go through this. And I am doing those tech steps as we speak. So what I ask for is grace, please. But I'm a keynote speaker, a facilitator, a coach, an author, and a strategic planning expert, right? And so we have with us today, we have someone very well versed in what she does. And I'm so excited that we have with us today Emily Taylor from TeenyBIG. So I'm going to bring Emily to the stage, but I want to share with you this. This conversation is critical to those wanting to understand how to make difficult decisions, whether you're a nonprofit, whether you're a mission-driven company or an association. And that's why we have with us Emily. Emily is going to help us, yes, walk through that. And she's with TeenyBIG, right? And I'm so excited that she's going to share with us all the ways that we can navigate these conversations. So, Emily, share a little bit about yourself and your experience.
Sure. So really great to be here, Sabrina. I know it's been a little while, so excited to talk to you today. And yeah, my experience, I actually come from the for-profit world. And what I love about what I bring to the nonprofit space is this mix of like what is going on in the nonprofit space as well as the for-profit space, so that we can look holistically at how we're facing challenges and not just be limited to our own nonprofit experience. I also have an art background, and so I approach problems really from using both sides of my brain, the left and right, the sort of creative and tactical. And I really think that's, it's part of why I named my business TeenyBIG. I think we got to look big, we got to look miniature, and really assess problems for, not just through our own experience, but through a lot of different experiences to really see what's going on.
I'm very excited to have you on this stage because I think a lot of times people don't pause and think and plan and strategize and do all those things. So what really inspired you to focus on helping organizations make difficult decisions?
Well, I see myself, I love problem solving, and I think decision making is part of that. And I see myself, in my life, I'm a trailblazer, and not in sort of the sort of social sense of the word. The actual definition is someone who goes out and like hacks out and sees what's out there before anyone goes out and actually, decides where they're going to go. And so in that sense, I love helping organizations see the lay of the land, see what people are thinking out there, and using that to help them decide where to go rather than just having them blindly go out and use their intuition to make the best decision.
So you're really talking, well, in my world, I think of pre-strategic planning. So is that the case? And if it is, can you explain that concept of pre-strategic planning and why it's important for organizations?
Yeah, I think any big decision, this process can be helpful, but I use pre-strategic planning as a way of oftentimes, people think when they need to make big decisions to jump into a strategic plan. There's a lot of situations where maybe you really don't really have a sense of where you're going, or you have a lot of decisions, especially post-pandemic. I've seen organizations that their leadership needs to change. They took on a bunch of staff. There's sort of a, just a layering of problems that if you don't take that time to really step back, get aligned, see what the lay of the land is, a strategic plan is just gonna be too soon, too messy, and taking that time, just to clean things up, really get everyone on the same page before you start making decisions, is super helpful. So yeah, that's
Oh, okay, so I have a question because I do strategic planning, but a lot of times, like you said, how can a nonprofit really identify when a strategic plan might not be suitable for their current state? Because I get called in for strategic plans, and sometimes I'm like, "You ain't ready." But how can they identify?
Yeah, I know we've talked about this a bit, and I think it's there's going to be no really clear cut answer, but I think if you feel like people are not on the same page, especially leaders, whoever would be a part of that strategic plan, key stakeholders, that could be a sign. Like if there's a lot of decisions to be making, like I mentioned, just staff changes, maybe environmental changes, internal changes, that might be a time where you're just like, you can't really solve all those at once in a strategic plan. And so I think just things feel unsettled and you're not quite sure how you're going to clearly make decisions through a process, like yours. It's time to just take that step back and assess the situation so that you're not making mistakes by rushing.
Got it. And so when what I hear you saying is if you're in crises, strategic planning is not a good time. But that's kind of obvious, right? I guess if you um what I feel when I get called in and they want a strategic plan is it's just a check mark, right? Someone told them that they needed to have it, but they haven't really thought about the why around it. Is it important to think about the why?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, if you're just doing a strategic plan to do one, I mean, I think you would agree too. Like, that's not really the point in doing it. I do think one area, besides sort of the chaotic situations an organization might get into, is when an organization is going through a lot of growth. It can, it's not chaos, but it can feel really messy, and
Mhm.
so a lot of times I find leaders that are going from making intuitive decisions to more intentional decisions is a really good time to strategic plan or to pre-strategic plan. And the reason I say that is a leader can do a lot of great things in their own head when an organization is small, but as they grow, they need to include more people in their decision making, and that's a big shift. And sometimes you might not be aware of it. And so if you get into that situation where a leader is just calling the shots, and all of a sudden people are getting upset. There's people who, stakeholders who are part of that decision making and they weren't included. That's when things can start to get a little messy, and you have to start to
Mhm.
um, take what's in that leader's head and bring it out into the open and really clarify what it is and who's involved.
Okay, okay, that makes sense to me. I remember when I was growing my organization and I went from like five full-time people to like 15 full-time people. It was a very different dynamic. And the five of us clicked and we forgot to bring in the other 10. So that makes sense. That's a great example. Thank you for sharing that. So what are some of the other common pitfalls leaders face when making like big strategic decisions?
Well, let's see. So to kind of go through, and just to clarify what I define as a big strategic decision, it's a decision that involves a lot of people, that has an effect on a lot of people. It's one thing to decide, what you're going to wear today, what the new break room might look like. But when you decide to change leadership, maybe move to a new building, maybe your mission is changing, those are things where if you don't really get others' opinions, get what that playing field is, what that path is going to look like once you trailblaze through it, uh, that's where you're going to run into some of those issues. Sorry, I feel like I don't know if I addressed your question.
It's okay. No, like, those common pitfalls, and you've said one very clearly, leaving out people in that process of decision making, especially if you were very used to being like almost like an autocratic dictator in a sense, right? Yeah. So I've been through all of those transitions, and I tell you what, it is hard. It is hard. And I wish I had someone around to say, hey, let's kind of look at this before we make these big strategic decisions. We delved into a capital campaign, moved into a new building, expanded services, and these were all kind of like my passions. And sometimes what I realized is my team got burned out around me. Like, I was energized because I understood the big vision, but they didn't. And all they felt like was they kept going and going, and that the goalposts kept changing. And so you can burn. Do you think, and I know that's not one of the questions here, but do you think that might be, I'd love to know your opinion on this. Do you think that might be a big part of why we burn out in our industry?
I do think so. And it's a tough transition because, a lot of nonprofits are smaller. And so when you grow, you can be an independent leader making those intuitive decisions. And so when you do grow and you gain more staff, you add in more programs, there's just more and more people who are affected by it. And you don't have that clarity. And it just makes me think of a client that I worked with where they had a very long-term leader, decades long. And as they grew, staff didn't understand how decisions were made. And so they would get upset of like, well, why are we doing this? Why are we coming into the office? Why does this person get to do this? And so it was really unclear. Everything was happening in that leader's head. And so to be able to, whether it's your partners, whether it's your staff, you have to be really clear about how you're making decisions and know, have a sense for what people are thinking and feeling outside of your organization so you can clearly communicate to them.
That makes sense, because I think I've actually been now I want to say, I don't, it's opposite of victim. I've been I perpetrated, there you go. I perpetrated the mistakes in which you're talking about as a leader. So thank you. I'm trying real hard not to do that anymore. So it's hard. And if you're just joining us, welcome to this broadcast, because we're talking about how to make difficult decisions. And we've covered some topics around, pre-strategic planning. Is strategic planning right for you, right? And what does it look like when it's not? And when you're making difficult decisions, you have to avoid those common pitfalls. One of them being, because I've experienced it, keeping it all in your head and not transitioning when leadership. For me, I will say what I've learned through this aha moment is transitioning without taking into account the team, right? If you are used to making the decisions and you're used to just kind of moving forward without bringing everyone on board, that could be a detriment to your team. I lived it, I breathed it. It was a detriment to my team. So that leads me to this next question. How can organizations involve their community? I have community here, but really, as this conversation is evolving, it's like, how can organizations involve their stakeholders in the decision-making process effectively? Because those stakeholders could be community, they could be staff, they could be board, they could be clients. How can they involve them effectively?
Yeah, they can be funders. It's really, I think that's part of my assessment with an organization is helping them think through, okay, who whose perspectives do you really need in order to make this decision? And, I think it's easy for people to feel like there's too many cooks in the kitchen. We can't get everyone's perspective. And so it's really helpful to decide, well, who is important for you to have buy-in to this decision that you're making. And so that really helps decide who. Then the how can really depend on, how big some of these groups are. And then also how objective does that research need to be. And so I come in, especially when organizations need objective listening. So I'll go in and listen to all those stakeholders that we mentioned, sometimes through surveys, sometimes through focus groups, sometimes through interviews, and really, get a good assessment for what's going on in each of those groups. An organization, can do some of that on their own, but it's definitely important to know the bias that they might bring to the table.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I was preparing for this conversation, I brought up for me a couple of situations because, a lot of people go after these grants. And I'll tell you about one of the grants that we went after as an organization, which totally changed our dynamic. And I wish some of the things that you're saying, like getting an assessment or a study so we can make the decision was available. But we went after an abstinence education grant, which really, we forgot to we got the grant. Sometimes you're chasing the dollar, right? And we got the grant and we forgot to let parents know. We forgot to let the community know. And then when we got this grant and we start talking about this curriculum and the topic and all of that, there was a little hesitation on the part. You would think there would not be, but there was some hesitation on the part. So if we would have done it right, what do you advise we should have done? What role would a community assessment or feasibility plan would have played in us deciding to even pursue that funding?
Yeah, and what was the hesitation? Was it participating in the program that the grant funded?
Yeah, it was hesitation around participating in the program. It was an abstinence-based education program. And even though you say the word abstinence, you think it's a good thing, right? But we still had to talk about other sensitive topics, and also the way we approached it and the way we talked about that abstinence education base. We were looking at like the Brookings Institute study, and we brought in the issues of poverty and if you wait till you're 21 to have kids. So it was a deeply entrenched. We looked at waiting to 21. It was based on waiting till you're 21 to have kids, to get married and have kids, obtaining full-time employment, and getting kids to graduate from high school. So that was our big, like, hairy, audacious goal. We were excited about it. So in pursuing grant monies to address those things, one of the topics we tackled was abstinence. And in talking about abstinence, it brought up a lot of other topics that kids started asking us questions around. And then they would get in the car and talk to their parents. Oh, this is what we talked about today. And then the parents will come to us and be like, what are y'all talking about with our kids?
Yeah. So there was a big gap in the stakeholders that were included in that decision making. And so that's one of those things. And it's not obvious. And Sabrina, all these things you're talking about, like, so many people face. So I'm very sympathetic to that situation. It's just not, you're trying to get stuff done. Like you can't always be aware of it. But in hindsight, what I would have done, to be able to do a community assessment with all those stakeholders, in an ideal world, the grantee or the grantor would be great to understand what they were really trying to achieve with the grant, and to talk to parents and even kids to not just understand what their fears might be around the topic, but also to understand the language that they use, because working that into your promoting of those programs, working to talk to those children so that they're using that language. So if the word abstinence kind of makes people a little jarred, like, to be able to know that up front, and so you can work that into the into the work that you do.
Yeah. And abstinence, is a good word at when you think, right? And that's the problem. We think, oh, abstinence is a good word. It's a good, but then the conversations that happen as you're talking about it, that was a lot of the flack
Yeah.
for us. And
And
so I
it's
wish
that internal external thing. Like I've run into people who, like, climate change is a big word that some people's audiences don't quite get or react to in the same way that a staff might, or asking someone to support you. There's just a lot of words out there that can be trigger words that just lead to confusion and don't lead to ever collaborating. And that's really the ultimate goal of collaborative decision making, or to do this work, is to really be able to have those perspectives, so you're talking about things in the right way, getting everyone on the same page.
Right. And so as you're talking about this collaborative decision making, I was an activator. I just pursued and didn't take the time to stop and ask people anything. And sometimes to my detriment. So can you share an example of a time when collaborative decision making really transformed an organization for the better?
Yeah, it makes me think about a client I recently wrapped up with, where they were struggling because they just felt like people weren't engaging with their mission, the people that they serve. They worked with a lot of teachers who are working with students, and they were really focused on improving those students' lives. And so by going out and I talked to teachers in all different sectors of the programs that they were reaching out to, and we really found that there were all these barriers that were sort of butting up against teachers' schedules, the way they felt like the programs addressed their needs. The language wasn't really resonating with them. They were also struggling with a lot of paperwork and sort of just day-to-day challenges. And so this organization, it was a really subtle shift, but they shifted their mission from focusing on the students to really focusing on teachers who were student-led, who used a student-led approach to their work. And so, and in addition to that, being able to really integrate listening tools throughout their program. So making sure they do a program, capture those perspectives right away. If they, have some sort of, educational outreach, to be able to collect information on that. And so they created these cycles that were able to, keep giving them the feedback, and they've really just increased a lot of engagement with teachers. Teachers see, that's their touch point, and so the teachers see the information communicated in their language, focus on them, but they're still affecting the students, but they're just more, they just shifted who they're really focused on.
What keeps playing in my head as you're talking and really sharing that example and talking about assessments and feasibility and all those things is this is kind of like the antidote to because this is the way we've always done it. Right?
Yeah.
A lot of times people do things because this is the way we've always done it, and they never take the time to really, what you just said, talk to the people who are providing the service and see what some of those barriers are. So then you can make a decision that will transform the organization. We don't think about transformation a lot. We just keep grinding and doing the work. But what you're saying is, and forgive me if I get this wrong, but this is my takeaway right now, is you're saying, look at it and you're saying pause, look at the components of it, talk to people. If you're having this, if your organization is in a transition or in a rut, or you want to do things different, talk to people, do the assessments, look at it, and it might change your organization, but it's okay. Did I get that right, or am I totally off? I'm trying to get what I want to from it.
Yeah, no, you are. And I'm trying to think of like a more simple way to break it apart. But when you make a big decision, it's not just you that it affects. And so to be able to understand not only how it affects other people, how they interpret it, how you can communicate better with them, educate them where there's misunderstandings, and adjust to so it's like removing the barriers that people might misunderstand or misinterpret because of the way you're talking about it or the information they don't know, but also to, as you push your work out into the world, to make sure it is inclusive of
Mm-hmm.
people's perspectives. Because if you want buy-in, people need information, they need clarity, they need to know what you're doing and how you got there. And so if you just go out and do it, you're going to have that pushback. If you listen to people, and it doesn't mean you have to do everything they say, but it shows that you are, including their perspective, but you're also integrating like how you're talking about it, and making sure you're not just blowing people over. It's not that authoritative decision making like we talked about earlier. It's inclusive, but still true to your mission, still true to the organization.
Got it. So what practical steps can, nonprofit leaders take to really improve their decision-making process?
Let's see. I would, start by just a real, self-assessment to see if you are someone who is making decisions without taking in information from other stakeholders. And so to be able to assess, even, community-based leaders can still make intuitive decisions, but if you don't have that input, you have that community assessment, that word from others, you're not going to be able to really make a collaborative, intuitive decision. And so to be able to see if you're gaining that input, and if not, try to determine who you really need to hear from. Like I mentioned before, there's staff, there's funders, there's your community partners, to be able to figure out who is really important in that decision, because you don't need to listen to people who you don't need that buy-in from.
So I'm going to take total advantage of you right now. and first, let me go by the script, and then I'll take total advantage of you, right? So does anyone have any questions? If you do, put them in the chat, right? And I will ask your question, because I know I have a question. But I will also say this. One of the most common questions I get is, can you help with engaging my board in fundraising? And the answer for me is yes. And all you got to do is visit my website at www.supportingworldshope.com to check out my services. Now, I'll wait and see if there's any questions. We got like 3 or 4 platforms that we have to wait on, but I am going to take total advantage of you. So I am a part of an organization that started in 2020. So we're 4 years old. And we started based on 4 pillars, let's say. We've never been we've never really been able to focus and get anything done under one of those pillars. So, you know how it is when you have that organizations, all volunteer led, that thing. So it's like 2 or 3 people that really are involved in the decision making.
Mm-hmm.
So the discussion amongst those is like, man, we should just cut that 4th pillar. We never done anything in it. And we could very easily go to everybody else and say, we're cutting that, and this is why. In your opinion, and what you do, how would you approach that collaborative decision making in that in that process, as opposed to just 3 people saying, this is what we're going to do, and that's it? How would you do the collaborative piece?
Yeah, well, I'd want to understand, who your various stakeholders are. I'm assuming there's like, who is it? Who is this?
It's other board members. We have membership, membership, and we have an advisory board, and we have some donors. Now, like again, the organization is 4 years old, so the donor base is some small individual donor bases, but we have a huge special event. So I don't know if I would say donors, but that membership might be a huge stakeholder, and the advisory board and the board itself.
And who are you serving with those pillars?
We service the client. So our client base we have this, we give out scholarships, and we also have a community closet where we service clients around that. And then our membership, which is not really a membership, but though we provide volunteer opportunities in the community. So
yeah, well, I would say, for that, just with my, hat on and without a ton of information, I would say, listening to your clients, the people that you're serving, would be a really important part of deciding which pillars to, how to narrow down. So be able to go and be able to capture what those students are thinking, what's important to them, and to be able to come back to those other stakeholders. I think because you're newer, because it seems like maybe some of those pillars haven't been super active, then there might be less opinions from funders, from members about them. But if you can come back and say, hey, we really listened to the people we serve, and we just find that, like, based on our capacity, this is really where we should focus.
Okay.
That's a really great way to communicate to them, and you could, still gather their perspectives. But I think in that situation, you probably don't need to do as broad of a reach, of listening and assessing.
Okay. So what I hear from you is try to get as many, not everybody's input, but not just lead from the leadership perspective, right? Get other buy-in, not buy-in, but input from others.
Yeah, and prioritize it. Who really is most important in that decision? For you, for that situation, I mean, your mission and who you're serving is a priority. And it always is a priority, but sometimes, depending on the work that you're doing, you really know the people you serve, and you don't necessarily know what funders are thinking or partners are thinking. For instance, if you would move a location or change leadership, that might be less connected to the clients and more connected to partnerships and funders, because they're concerned about what's going to happen next, who's going to be in charge, how is that going to affect my relationship.
Got it. This is not the sexy stuff that people like to talk about. And I get it. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard because we all operate. Well, I can just say, I can only speak for me. I'm an activator. And so I'm constantly moving, and it's hard to kind of slow it down and really deal with these things. You just want to make a decision, make it, move on, and let the chips fall where they may. That's the way I was taught. It really was.
It works for a lot of situations until it doesn't. And so that's where I think just being aware of when decisions fall into that big category, and when it's worth taking that step back.
Yeah. This has been very enlightening for me. And I didn't see any questions, because I think what is happening is that people are processing this information, because as you can see, I'm processing it live, and I didn't even think about that organization. And I was like, oh, that's what she's talking about. Let me ask. And so what I would invite people to do is, as you are processing this, reach out to Emily. Emily, how can people get in contact with you?
Well, I was gonna say, follow me on LinkedIn. Emily Taylor, TeenyBIG. I really, I'm really active on LinkedIn, and I love, having conversations, thinking through problems like we just did with your organization, Sabrina. So that's really a great place to get tips and tricks. You can also go to my website and get my newsletter at www.teennybig.com.
And so, do you have any final words? But I that's what I have written down, but I want to phrase it just a little bit different. What are your final words to someone who may not be embracing this idea of slowing down and making those strategic, collaborative decisions? What would be your final words to them?
I would say that there's so much value to this process. When I talk about pre-strategic planning or big decision making, the process is really listening to your stakeholders objectively and taking in that information. And so even if you don't feel like you're kind of chaotic enough to take that big step back, there are so many immediate benefits to this process too. So being able to really, when you listen to your clients, like we were just talking about with your situation, you can learn where there are barriers, where you can improve your impact, what impact they are seeing in their own words, not just attendees or butts in seats, but like, how are you really changing their lives and gathering those stories? And so, depending on sort of your level of challenges you're facing right now, this community assessment can really help you at all different levels, and you have that information then when you are making a big decision, when you are maybe a little lost at who your organization is or how you make big decisions, you can always fall back on that information at those times too.
That is wonderful. So I leave you with this: your mission matters and deserves to be highlighted in your community. Your mission matters and can be an inspiration to those who need it the most. Your mission matters and deserves to be funded to its fullest capacity. And that is Sipping Tea with Sabrina. See you next time. Bye-bye, y'all. Be blessed.